Well, it's Halloween again, and I'm stuck at home this year. Yeah, who'd have thought that the scariest thing to happen in 2020 wouldn't be World War III or giant killer bees or the US being literally on fire right now. No, it was a really, really tiny spiky ball that just so happened to kill 962,000 people worldwide. Oh, and crippling economic recessions didn't help either. So this year, I thought I'd take things up a notch and talk about something actually scary. Not some goofy goosebumps or cheesy websites or whatever the fuck this was. We're going to talk about a truly disturbing art movement that goes back almost 100 years, and a film born out of that movement so terrifying that it was stolen by the Japanese government and destroyed. Tonight, we talk about Euroguro. Let me take you back to the 1930s. Japan was growing increasingly westernized, right-wing, and nationalist. The Great Depression was on the horizon, and while average citizens were miserable, the military prospered, growing larger and larger and annexing more and more land. The oppression and misery felt by the masses soon seeped into their artistic expression as an act of counterculture to the conservative state. As the state tried to censor it, it only became more and more darker, more and more depraved, more and more hedonistic. Japan already had a pretty intense interest with erotica, but this was something different entirely. It preyed on the taboo, the most disgusting, vile, grotesque acts and fantasies a human mind could possibly imagine. That's where the name comes from, you know. Euroguro is what's known as wasei eigo, when Japanese phrases are taken from parts of English words. Euro is from erotic, while guro is from grotesque. Early on, the word nansetsu, from the word nonsense, was also used in conjunction, but this has seemed to fall largely out of practice. Euroguro spanned across many forms of media, from literature to woodblock prints to magazines, all of which contained images of intense sexuality, unnatural and distorted bodies, graphic depictions of violence and rape, and whatever else a depraved mind could think of. Sometimes inspiration came to artists from real-life incidents. It's impossible to talk about Euroguro without discussing the Sada Abe incident of 1936. Abe, a geisha and sex worker, killed her lover, Kichizo Ishida, out of jealousy, strangling him in his sleep. She then cut off his penis and stored it in her kimono until her arrest 3 days later. Euroguro artists and authors had a field day with that one. After World War II, post-war Japan became a lot more progressive and experimental. With new forms of media taking off, the movement continued steadily into the underground, mostly through manga, but soon leading up to anime as well. This leads us to a man named Hiroshi Harada. In 1987, he began work on an animated adaptation of a 1984 manga entitled Shoujo Tsubaki, known as Mr. Arashi's Amazing Freak Show in the West, which was, in and of itself, a retelling of a street theater story popular during Euroguro's inception. Unable to get any financial backing from any studio, for reasons you'll see in a bit, Harada decided to make it on his own, using whatever money he had in his life savings. I mean, he was already a fairly successful animator, so it wasn't too difficult for him. Still, the man worked tirelessly for 5 years, hand-drawing each frame, recruiting a cast of unknown actors to provide voice work. By 1992, he had finished his opus, and it was screened in a large red circus tent on the grounds of the Mitake Jinja Shinto Shrine in Tokyo, projected on 3 screens simultaneously with a cascade of lights, smoke effects, and even cherry blossom petals raining down onto the crowd. Unfortunately, no footage or even photos exist of these screenings, so I've had to recreate most of them with compositing. Later on, in 1994, the Japanese Film Rating Board demanded that a second cut of the film be made with offensive material censored. This was done by optically blurring out these scenes and muting some of the dialogue. But even that wasn't enough, as in 1999, after a screening overseas, Japanese customs confiscated the original uncensored print, and, according to Harada himself, had it destroyed. For over a decade, all that survived was a Telecine VHS copy made prior to the edits, which was subsequently released on DVD by Cine Malta in 2006. However, in 2013, the supposed original 16mm print was found in the back of a Japanese warehouse, from which a new 1080p transfer was scanned and screened at various festivals. Plans for a Blu-ray release have apparently been announced, but no release date has been set. Although watching the VHS copy, I don't think it should. Now y'all know me, I'm no stranger to disturbing footage. I watched multiple shock tapes to find the Hong Kong 97 body, and I sifted through hours upon hours of 9/11 videos, so it's fair to say I've been a bit desensitized to graphic images. But this film is something else. I can barely even show any bits from it at all because of how fucking brutal it is. The only way I could possibly convey the sheer horror of this film is if I go through and describe it point by point. Any graphic footage will be pixelated, obviously, but I'm going to talk about everything, so if any of this upsets you, then you should probably leave now if you haven't already. The film's story is about a 12-year-old girl named Midori, who's been forced to make money for her family by selling paper flowers, as her mother is extremely ill and her father apparently abandoned them. I've read from other websites that it's implied she gives sexual favors too, but I didn't see anything to prove that. A strange man in a hat takes pity on her, buying up all the flowers and giving her an address that she can go to if she's ever in trouble. Upon returning home to tell her mother the good news, she finds her dead, with rats feasting on her genitals. And yes, you get to see it. Midori goes to the address the man gave her, and it turns out to be where a freak show is located. The strange man in the hat is the owner of the freak show, and he's in charge of several deformed and odd-looking carnies, all of whom take pleasure in abusing Midori. In fact, upon first arriving there, a quadriplegic man ripped straight out of Todd Browning's 1931 film Freaks, waddles up to her and shoves his head up her skirt. She's been there for less than a minute, and already she's sexually assaulted. The other carnies proceed to rape and mistreat her time and time again, and she lives her life in abject misery. One scene shows her hiding a group of puppies from the other freaks, feeding them, taking care of them, until one of them comes along, takes the puppies out of their hiding spot, and throws one on the ground. We get a close-up as we see her step on and crush another one, every detail of the dog's innards being drawn in abhorrent detail. At this point during my first screening, I nearly threw up. This is the worst thing that I've ever seen. Probably because I'm a dog person, but Christ. As if that wasn't enough, it's revealed in the next scene that the freaks took the dead dogs, cooked them into a stew, then fed it back to Midori. Another scene shows Midori waking up in the middle of the night to find everyone in the middle of unusual and gross sex acts. Including one freak licking another's exposed eyeball, which is actually a common trait in Euroguro. Too common. Suddenly, one day, a new addition arrives to the show. A dwarf who can contort himself to fit into small glass faces, named Wonder Matsumitsu. Though he's very strict and very controlling, he and Midori have a strange, budding romance, which is somehow the most wholesome thing in the entire movie. You know, after the whole multiple rape, crushing a girl's dreams and eating her dogs, I guess I'll take whatever I can get.
してあげてもいいわ。でも私もう少女じゃないの。
That is, until he gets fed up with an audience one day. One of them calls him fucking short ass. And so, Matsumitsu goes all 1977 Roger Waters on them.
You stupid motherfucker.
He makes them all hallucinate themselves with horrifying deformations and explosions of blood and gore. The audience runs out, terrified, shrieking for their lives. The police show up. The circus is disbanded. Everyone starts going their separate ways. The boss runs away with the money, and Midori and Matsumitsu decide to run away together and start a new life in Tokyo, free from the constraints of the freak show, where they live in peace for the rest of their lives. Huh? It's not over? But that's the ending, though. Like, what more can there be? Okay, actually, Matsumitsu gets fucking stabbed by a robber during a mugging, and Midori is left on her own. Again. Just like the start of the movie. But this time, with the laughing, taunting faces of the carnies mocking her, and her trying to kill each and every one of them. It fades to black as she cries. The song at the end during the credits is theorized by some to imply that Midori finally gives up and commits suicide. If there's any meaning behind this film or the original manga, it stems from the corruption of innocence. Midori represents purity and naivete, hence why she appears as a 12-year-old girl. This innocence is repeatedly and forcibly stripped from her, both metaphorically and literally, until she has nothing left. No home, no family, no lover, no will to live. She repeatedly expresses through narration how she wants to kill herself and how awful she was treated. The world doesn't give a shit about her purity. It will beat her down and beat her down time and time again, and she will have nothing. And for better or for worse, you really can feel that because of all the disturbing shit in this film. If you want to experience it, the 2006 DVD version is readily available on YouTube, age restricted of course. Or you could always buy the DVD, or hell, wait for the Blu-ray release whenever that happens. I almost wish that I could experience this film the proper way. In the red tents with all the spectacle of the lights and the crowds and the smoke. But then I remember Mr. Caterpillar Upskirt Man, and I never want to travel to Japan ever.